The sun hung merciless above the New Mexico desert, a burning eye that saw everything and forgave nothing. Heat waves danced across the red earth like spirits, distorting the distant mesas into wavering mirages. Above, a hawk circled lazily, its shadow fleeting across the scorched ground, the only movement in a landscape that seemed frozen in time. Clara Morrison pressed herself against a boulder, its surface hot enough to burn through her torn dress. She didn't care about the pain. Pain meant she was still alive, still moving, still ahead of him. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps, each one tasting of dust and desperation. The canteen at her hip held maybe 3 swallows of water, warm as blood and twice as precious. She'd been running for 2 days now, or was it 3? Time blurred together under the endless assault of sun and fear. Her feet, once soft from a teacher's life in Colorado, were now raw and bleeding inside boots never meant for this kind of journey. Each step sent fire shooting up her legs, but stopping meant death, or worse, going back. The bruises on her arms had turned from purple to yellow-green, a sickly rainbow marking where Samuel's hands had gripped too tight, held too long. Her wrists still bore the rope burns from that last night, when he'd tied her to the bedpost after catching her trying to leave. She touched them gently, remembering his words. "If you try to run again, Clara, I'll hunt you down like the animal you are. There ain't nowhere in this territory you can hide from me." But she had run anyway. Better to die free in the desert than live another day in that ranch house that had become her prison. Clara forced herself to move, knowing that every minute spent resting was a minute Samuel gained on her. He would be coming. She knew him well enough to know that. His pride wouldn't let him suffer the humiliation of a runaway wife. In the 3 years since their wedding, she'd watched him track wolves, mountain lions, even Apache raiders with a patience that bordered on obsession. He enjoyed the hunt almost as much as the kill. The landscape offered little comfort or concealment. Scattered mesquite and greasewood dotted the flatland, their thorny branches providing meager shade. In the distance, red rock formations rose like ancient sentinels, but they seemed to retreat with every painful step she took toward them. The desert was vast and unforgiving, a place where the unprepared died quickly and the prepared died slowly. Clara had neither preparation nor supplies. She'd fled with only what she wore, a calico dress now torn and stained with sweat and blood, and the few items she'd managed to grab, the nearly empty canteen, a pocket knife that had belonged to her father, and a small cloth bag containing 2 biscuits, hard as stones, and a handful of dried beans. It wasn't enough to sustain a rabbit, let alone a woman trying to cross 60 miles of badlands to reach the nearest town. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her tongue swollen with thirst. She knew the signs of heat sickness from the stories she'd heard, the dizziness, the confusion, the gradual shutdown of the body's will to continue. Already, dark spots danced at the edges of her vision, and her hands trembled with more than fear. A memory surfaced unbidden, standing before her classroom in Colorado Springs, teaching the Morrison children their letters. She'd been Miss Clara Hensley then, independent and proud, with dreams of maybe opening her own school someday. The children had loved her gentle ways and patient instruction. Parents had spoken of her with respect. She'd had a small room above the mercantile, her own money, her own life. Then Samuel Morrison had ridden into town, tall, handsome, with money from his cattle empire and a smile that made the other women jealous when he'd chosen to court the schoolteacher. He'd been charming then, bringing her wildflowers and books of poetry, speaking of the grand ranch he'd built for her in New Mexico territory. She'd been 23, and foolish enough to believe that love could bloom in the desert just as easily as in the mountains. The sun had shifted westward, casting longer shadows across the sand. Clara knew she needed to find shelter soon. Desert nights could be as cruel as the days, the temperature dropping 40 degrees or more, without fire or proper clothing. Hypothermia was as real a threat as heat stroke. She scanned the horizon desperately, looking for any sign of water or shelter. In the distance, she spotted what might be a line of cottonwoods, trees that grew only near water. Hope flickered in her chest, fragile as a candle flame in wind. But it was so far, and her legs felt like they were made of water themselves, barely able to support her weight. Behind her, somewhere in that vast expanse of nothing, Samuel would be coming. She could almost see him in her mind's eye, sitting tall in the saddle, his gray eyes cold as winter stone, that Colt .45 hanging loose at his hip. He'd have supplies, water, probably one of the Apache trackers he sometimes employed. He'd be patient, methodical, following her trail like reading a book. "You belong to me." He'd told her that first time she'd tried to speak up about his drinking, about the violent turns his temper took. "Everything you are, everything you have, everything you'll ever be, it's mine by law and by God." Clara stumbled over a loose stone, catching herself before she fell. She couldn't afford to fall, couldn't afford the precious energy it would take to rise again. The cottonwoods seemed no closer, dancing in the heat like a cruel mirage. Her mind began to play tricks. She thought she heard horses, thought she saw riders cresting the distant hills, but when she blinked, there was only empty land and endless sky. She thought of her mother, dead these 5 years now, who'd warned her about marrying a man she'd known only 3 months. "The desert changes people. Clara," she'd said. "It strips away pretense, shows what's really underneath. Make sure you know what's under that handsome face before you say yes." But Clara had been in love, or thought she had been, and Samuel had seemed so different then, so eager to please, so full of plans for their future. It wasn't until after the wedding, after he'd taken her to that isolated ranch 50 miles from the nearest neighbor, that she'd learned what the desert had already known. Samuel Morrison was a man who needed to own things completely, and what he owned, he had the right to break. The sun touched the western mountains now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if Clara had eyes for anything but survival. She forced herself forward, one step, then another, her world shrinking to the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. The cottonwoods were real. She could see individual branches now, hear the whisper of leaves in the evening breeze, just a little farther, just a little more. But her body had other ideas. Her knees buckled without warning, sending her sprawling into the dust. She lay there for a moment, cheek pressed to the still warm earth, tasting sand and defeat. This was how the desert claimed its victims, not in some dramatic final moment, but in the quiet surrender of flesh pushed beyond endurance. "Get up," she whispered to herself, the words barely audible. "Get up, Clara." But her limbs wouldn't obey. The darkness at the edges of her vision was spreading, and somewhere in that darkness, she thought she heard her mother singing the lullabies of her childhood. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad, dying here, better than what waited for her if Samuel found her alive. She closed her eyes, ready to let the desert take her. That's when she felt it, a vibration in the ground, rhythmic and growing stronger. Horses. Her eyes snapped open, adrenaline giving her the strength to turn her head. There, silhouetted against the dying light, a rider approached, but something was wrong with the picture. This wasn't Samuel's familiar form, wasn't the rigid posture of a man who'd learned to ride in eastern stables. This rider moved like water, flowing with the horse's motion as if they were one creature. And he was coming fast, too fast, as if her prone form was a destination rather than a chance discovery. Clara tried to rise, tried to run, but her body had nothing left to give. She could only watch as the rider drew closer, could only wait to learn whether the desert had sent her salvation or simply a different form of doom. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was a face that belonged to no white man, angular features carved by wind and sun, eyes the color of amber, and an expression that might have been concern or might have been something else entirely. Then there was nothing but the vast silence of the desert and the first cold stars beginning to pierce the darkening sky. Koanayati had been tracking the woman for 6 hours, reading her story in the disturbed sand and broken mesquite branches. She moved like prey, zigzagging without purpose, doubling back on her own trail, leaving signs of panic everywhere she passed. But there was something else in those tracks, Something that made him continue following when wisdom said to turn away. Determination. Despite the blood drops that spotted the sand, despite the stumbling gait that grew more pronounced with each mile, she kept moving forward. He'd first noticed her trail at dawn while hunting antelope near Coyote Ridge. Fresh tracks heading into the worst part of the desert. Made by a woman's boots. City boots, from the look of them. With heels meant for boardwalks, not sand. No horse tracks accompanied them. No pack marks. Just a lone woman walking into death's embrace. Koa had almost turned away then. The desert claimed many fools, and he'd learned long ago that interfering with fate brought nothing but trouble. His Apache grandfather would have said the spirits had already marked her path. His Mexican mother would have crossed herself and whispered prayers for the woman's soul. But something in those tracks held him. Maybe the way she'd paused to tear strips from her dress to wrap her bleeding feet, or how she'd circled back to check if she was being followed. This wasn't just foolishness. This was desperation. Now, watching her crumpled form from a distant ridge, he weighed his options. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Night would bring cold that could kill as surely as the day's heat. She hadn't moved in several minutes, though he could see the slight rise and fall of her chest. Still alive. Then, but for how long? Koa touched the medicine pouch at his throat, feeling the sacred items within, a piece of turquoise from his mother's homeland, an eagle feather from his first vision quest, and a small silver cross that had belonged to his father. 3 bloodlines flowed in his veins: Apache warrior, Mexican horseman, and through his father's mother, the pale-skinned settlers who called themselves American. He belonged fully to none of them and partially to all, walking between worlds like the shadow he'd trained himself to be. The woman stirred, trying to rise. Even from this distance, he could see the bruises marking her arms, the rope burns on her wrists. He'd seen such marks before, on Apache women taken by soldiers, on Mexican girls sold to Comancheros. Someone had held this woman against her will. Someone she'd risked the desert to escape. That changed things. Koa clicked his tongue softly, and his horse, a paint stallion with one blue eye, moved forward without need of reins. They descended the ridge like smoke flowing downhill, making no more sound than wind through grass. The woman must have sensed something because she turned her head, eyes widening with terror as she saw him approach. He stopped 20 feet away, dismounting in one fluid motion. She tried to scramble backward, but her body betrayed her, limbs refusing to cooperate. He could see her more clearly now, pale skin burned red by sun, hair the color of corn silk tangled and matted with dust, eyes blue as the mountain lakes of his mother's stories. Young, maybe 25 summers, with the soft look of someone who'd never known hardship until recently. "Please," she whispered, voice cracked as dried leather. "Please, I have nothing." Koa remained still, reading her the way he'd read her tracks. Fear dominated, but underneath lay that same determination. She wouldn't beg, he realized. She'd pleaded for mercy, but she wouldn't beg for her life. This one had pride, even broken as she was. Moving slowly, he pulled his water skin from the saddle and approached. She watched him like a rabbit watches a coyote, ready to bolt if her body would allow it. When he knelt beside her and offered the water, she hesitated, suspicion warring with desperate thirst. "Drink," he said, his voice carrying the musical cadence of his mother's Spanish mixed with the harder consonants of Apache. "The desert has already taken enough from you." She reached for the skin with shaking hands, but couldn't manage to hold it steady. Without thinking, he supported it for her, letting her drink in small sips. His grandfather had taught him that kindness to strangers brought either great blessing or great curse. Looking at this woman, he wondered which she would prove to be. "Who did this to you?" The words came out before he could stop them, his fingers ghosting near but not touching the bruises on her arms. She pulled back, defensive walls slamming up despite her weakness. "I fell," she said, the lie as transparent as spring water. Koa studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. Everyone had their secrets. The desert would reveal truth in its own time. He stood, decision made. "You'll die here." he said matter-of-factly. Tonight, when the cold comes. Or tomorrow when the sun returns. The coyotes are already gathering. She followed his gaze to the distant shape slinking between the shadows. Maybe that's better, she whispered, and something in her tone made his chest tighten unexpectedly. Death is never better, he said, repeating words his mother had spoken during the cholera outbreak that had nearly claimed her. Death is just ending. Life is possibility. He moved back to his horse, untying the blanket rolled behind his saddle. The woman watched him with confused wariness as he returned and wrapped it around her shoulders. The wool smelled of smoke and horse and the wild herbs he used to keep insects away. I can't pay you, she said, clutching the blanket like it might be snatched away. Did I ask for payment? He crouched beside her again, this time checking her feet. The boots were ruined, the leather stiff with blood. Through the holes, he could see raw flesh that would fester by morning if not tended. These must come off. No! She jerked back, then gasped at the pain the movement caused. I need them. I have to keep going. Going where? He gestured at the empty desert stretching in every direction. The nearest town is 3 days riding. You wouldn't make 3 hours. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. I can't go back. I won't go back. I didn't say back. I said off. He waited, patient as stone, until she finally nodded, as gently as his hands knew how. He worked the boots free. Her feet were worse than he'd expected. Blistered, torn, already showing signs of infection. She bit her lip hard enough to draw blood but made no sound. From his saddlebags, he retrieved the healing supplies he always carried. Traditional Apache remedies mixed with Mexican herbs and a few modern medicines traded from American merchants. His hands worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning wounds, applying poultices, wrapping her feet in soft deer hide. You're Indian, she said, not quite a question. Apache, he confirmed, then added, and Mexican, and a quarter white, if bloodlines matter to you. She shook her head slightly. I used to think they did, back when I thought I understood the world. A bitter laugh escaped her. I was a teacher. I thought I knew things. Teachers are sacred to my mother's people, he said, tying off the last bandage. They preserve wisdom, pass it to the next generation. I taught children their letters and numbers, she said. Nothing sacred about that. You taught them to read the world. How is that not sacred? She looked at him then, really looked, as if seeing him for the first time. He wondered what she saw, the Apache warrior trained to kill silently in darkness, the Mexican vaquero who could gentle wild horses with whispered words, or the part of him that belonged to neither world fully. Her scrutiny made him uncomfortable in a way enemy rifles never had. The sun had vanished behind the western mountains, leaving only afterglow. The temperature was already dropping, and he could see her beginning to shiver despite the blanket. Decision time. He could give her supplies, point her toward town, and ride away. That would be the wise choice, the safe choice. But wisdom and safety had never been his strongest guides. Can you ride? He asked. Hope flickered in her eyes, quickly suppressed. Yes, I could, if... He was already moving, adjusting his saddle, making room. When he turned back, hand extended, she hesitated again. Where? The single word carried volumes of fear and desperate need. There's a place, he said carefully. Hidden, safe, water, shelter, food. You can rest, heal, decide your next path. Why? Her voice broke on the word. Why would you help me? Koa considered the question, not sure he knew the answer himself. Maybe it was the determination in her tracks, the refusal to surrender even when surrender seemed the only option. Maybe it was the bruises that reminded him of other women, other times when he'd turned away and later wished he hadn't. Or maybe it was something in her eyes, a wildness that the desert recognized as kin. Because the one who did this to you, he said finally, he's wrong. You don't belong to him. The desert has claimed you now, and the desert protects its own. She stared at him for a long moment, then placed her hand in his. Her skin was soft despite the sun damage, her grip stronger than he'd expected. He lifted her easily. She weighed nothing, bones of a bird, and settled her in front of him on the paint stallion. "My name is Clara," she whispered as his arms came around her to take the reins. "Clara Morrison, though I suppose that doesn't matter anymore." "Names always matter," he said, clicking to set the horse in motion. "They carry power, tell stories. But if you need a new one, the desert will provide." She leaned back against him, whether from exhaustion or trust he couldn't tell. Her hair smelled of dust and fear sweat, but underneath he caught a hint of something else. Lavender, maybe, or the rosewater Eastern women favored. Civilization clinging to her even here. They rode in silence as stars emerged overhead. The ancient patterns his grandfather had taught him to read. The horse knew the way, picking a path through rocks and thorns with the sureness of long practice. Koa felt the woman, Clara, relaxing against him incrementally, exhaustion finally overwhelming fear. "He'll come for me," she said suddenly, voice small in the vastness. "My husband, he'll never stop looking." "Let him look," Koa replied. "The desert is large and full of bones. Many men have vanished here, thinking themselves hunters." She shivered, and he couldn't tell if it was from cold or memory. "You don't know him. Samuel Morrison owns the largest ranch in 3 counties. He has money, men, influence. He's friends with the territorial governor. And yet, his wife runs barefoot through the desert to escape him." Koa guided the horse down a narrow deer trail visible only by moonlight. Power built on fear is like a house built on sand. It looked strong until the first real storm. They were entering canyon country now, the walls rising around them like protective arms. Clara had gone quiet, and he thought she might have fallen asleep until she spoke again. "I dream sometimes that I'm back in Colorado, teaching school, free to walk where I please without asking permission." Her voice carried a longing sharp as any blade. "Foolish dreams. No dream of freedom is foolish," he said, thinking of his own people, forced onto reservations, told where they could ride and where they couldn't. Sometimes dreams are all that keep us alive. The horse's hooves echoed off stone as they entered a narrow canyon that seemed to lead nowhere. But Koa knew its secrets, knew the hidden turn that revealed a passage barely wide enough for a rider, knew the ancient handholds carved by his ancestors that allowed access to the valley beyond. "Close your eyes," he told Clara as they approached the passage. "Trust me." He felt her tense, then deliberately relax, choosing trust over fear. It moved something in him, that small act of faith. The passage was dark as a cave, branches scraping at them from both sides. But then they emerged into moonlight again, and Clara's soft gasp told him she saw what he'd wanted her to see. The hidden valley spread before them like a secret jewel, grass silver in the moonlight. The musical sound of running water, cottonwoods whispering promises of shade and safety. Along the far wall, ancient drawings told stories of his people's time here before the white men came, before the world changed. "It's beautiful," Clara breathed, and he heard tears in her voice. "It's sanctuary," he corrected, guiding the horse toward the small adobe structure built against the canyon wall. Not his work, but maintained by him, a shelter for those who needed it. For tonight, tomorrow, as long as necessary. As he lifted her down from the horse, her hands gripped his shoulders for balance, and their eyes met. In that moment, he saw past the fear and exhaustion to something else, a spark that refused to be extinguished, a strength that bruises and brutality hadn't broken. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," he replied. Surprised by the roughness in his own voice, the desert extracted a price for its protection. You may find it higher than you're willing to pay. But even as he said it, looking into those eyes blue as mountain lakes, Koa suspected the price might be extracted from him as well. The spirits worked in mysterious ways, and bringing this broken bird to his sanctuary would have consequences he couldn't yet foresee. For now, though, there was water to fetch and a fire to build, wounds to tend and a woman to keep alive through the cold desert night. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, including the certainty that Samuel Morrison would come hunting. But tonight, in this hidden valley where ancient spirits still danced, a woman named Clara would sleep safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. And a man caught between worlds would stand guard, already knowing he would place himself between her and whatever darkness followed her trail. The desert had made its choice. Now they would all live with the consequences. Clara woke to the sound of water over stone and the scent of wood smoke. For a moment, confusion held her. This wasn't the ranch house with its heavy oak furniture and suffocating silence. Then memory rushed back. The desert, the collapse. Strong arms lifting her onto a horse. She sat up too quickly, gasping as pain shot through her abused body. Slowly came a quiet voice from the doorway. Koa stood silhouetted against morning light, a steaming cup in his hand. Your body has been through much. It needs time to remember how to move without fear. She accepted the cup gratefully, some kind of tea that tasted of herbs and honey. The warmth spread through her, chasing away the last cobwebs of sleep. In daylight, she could see the shelter properly, adobe walls worn smooth by countless years, a fireplace built into one corner, simple furniture that looked handmade, clean, sparse, but somehow welcoming. How long did I sleep? Through the night and into morning, the sun is 3 hands high. He moved into the room with that fluid grace she'd noticed before, setting down a plate of food, flatbread, dried meat, some kind of preserved fruit. Eat slowly. Your stomach has forgotten fullness. Clara took a small bite, aware of him watching her. In daylight, she could see him more clearly. His face held the angular beauty of his Apache heritage, softened slightly by his other bloodlines. His hair, black as a raven's wing, was tied back with a strip of leather. But it was his eyes that held her, amber like his horse's, holding depths of experience that made her wonder at his story. "This place," she said between careful bites. "How do you know about it?" "My grandfather's people have known this valley for generations. It's sacred, a place of healing, of refuge. The Spanish never found it. The Americans never found it." He settled cross-legged on the floor with a grace that made the movement look natural. "Now it serves those who need sanctuary. And you just trust me here. You don't know me." A slight smile touched his lips. "I know enough. I know you ran rather than surrender. I know you wrapped your own wounds and kept walking when most would have lain down to die. I know you carry bruises that speak of courage. It takes courage to survive what you survived and still choose escape." Clara looked down at her arms, at the yellowing marks she'd grown so accustomed to hiding. Some would call it foolishness, not courage. "The same could be said of my bringing you here." He stood, moving to a shelf carved directly into the adobe wall. "But sometimes the heart knows truths the mind hasn't learned yet." He returned with fresh bandages and a ceramic pot of salve. "Your feet need tending." Clara hesitated, then extended her legs. The deer-hide wrappings were stained with blood and discharge. She bit her lip as he unwound them, but his touch was gentler than any she'd known in years. The wounds looked better than she'd feared, still raw, but clean, already beginning to heal. "This will hurt," he warned, scooping salve onto his fingers. It smelled of pine and something sharper. "I'm used to hurt," she said without thinking, then flushed at the admission. His hands stilled for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before. No one should be used to hurt. The salve did burn, but it was a clean pain, medicinal rather than malicious. Clara found herself studying his face as he worked, the complete concentration he gave to the task. When had someone last touched her with such careful intent to heal rather than harm? "There," he said, tying off the last bandage. "A few more days and you'll walk without pain. A week, and you can travel if you choose." Travel where? The question escaped before she could stop it. "I have nowhere to go. No money, no family, nothing but the clothes you found me in. The desert teaches us that nothing is just another word for possibility." He cleaned his hands in a bowl of water, movements precise and economical. But those are tomorrow's concerns. Today, You heal. A comfortable silence settled between them as Clara finished eating. Through the open door, she could see the valley beyond. Green grass rippling in the breeze, the stream catching sunlight like scattered diamonds. It seemed impossible that such a place could exist in the harsh landscape she'd crossed. "I should know your name," she said suddenly. "You saved my life, and I don't even know what to call you." "Koa Nayati," he said. "Koa to my mother's people, Nayati to my father's." "What does it mean?" "Koa is crow in the old language. Nayati means he who wrestles. My grandmother said I was born fighting, the cord wrapped around my neck, refusing to breathe until the medicine man tricked me into it." That slight smile again. "She said the spirits marked me as stubborn from the first moment." "Stubborn enough to help strange women in the desert?" "Apparently so." Clara set aside the empty plate, feeling more human than she had in months. "I should tell you, my husband, Samuel Morrison. He's not a man who accepts loss. He'll come looking. You said this last night." Koa's expression didn't change. "Let him come. You don't understand. He has resources, connections. He's hired Apache trackers before. For hunting, he knows this country." "He knows the surface of this country," Koa corrected. "There's a difference between knowing where water runs and understanding why it chooses that path, between seeing tracks and reading the story they tell. Your husband is a man who takes. The desert gives nothing to those who only take." Clara wanted to argue, to make him understand the danger, but something in his calm certainty quieted her protests. Instead, she asked, "Why do you live out here alone?" "Who says I'm alone?" He gestured toward the door. "The hawk that nests in the cottonwood, the fox who drinks at dawn, the spirits of my ancestors in the canyon walls. This valley is fuller than any town. But no people? People come when they need to, like you." He rose, fluid as water. "Can you stand? There's something you should see." Clara tested her legs carefully. They held, though she had to grip the wall for balance. Koa offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His skin was warm, roughened by sun and work, but his support was steady as stone. He led her outside, moving slowly to accommodate her careful steps. The morning air carried the sweetness of grass and wildflowers she hadn't noticed in the darkness. The stream ran clearer than any water she'd seen, emerging from the rocks at the valley's head and winding between cottonwoods and willows. "Look," he said, pointing to the canyon wall. Clara gasped. In daylight, she could see them clearly, ancient drawings covering the rock face, horses and hunters, spirals and suns, handprints that seemed to reach across centuries. Some were faded by time, others still vibrant with color. "My people's history," Koa explained. "This was a gathering place. Long before the Spanish came, warriors would come here before battle to seek visions. Women came to give birth. The dying came to pass peacefully from one world to the next." "It's beautiful." Clara reached out, not quite touching the stone. "Like a book written on the world itself. You understand." His approval warmed her more than it should have. Not everyone sees it. Some look and see only primitive drawings. "I was a teacher," Clara reminded him. "I know stories matter, however they're told." They stood quietly, Clara aware of his supporting arm, of the solidness of him beside her. Safe. The word whispered through her mind. Foreign after so long. When was the last time she'd felt safe in a man's presence? "There's a pool further up," Koa said eventually. "Fed by a hot spring? It would help your muscles. Ease the pain." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. My dress. There are clothes in the shelter, things left by other travelers, cleaned and mended." His voice carried no judgment, only practicality. "The desert cares nothing for what we wear, only that we survive." An hour later, Clara lowered herself into the natural pool, gasping at the heat. She wore a simple shift Koa had found, loose cotton, worn soft by countless washings. He had withdrawn to give her privacy, but she could see him in the distance, tending his horse, his presence a comfort rather than a threat. The water worked its magic on her battered body, unknotting muscles she hadn't realized were clenched. Steam rose around her, scented with minerals and thyme. She let her head fall back, hair floating like water weeds, and, for the first time in 3 years, felt the possibility of being clean, not just in body, but in spirit. When she finally emerged, she found Koa had left new bandages and a clean dress on a nearby rock. The dress was simple, blue calico, patched but serviceable. It fit well enough, and more importantly, it wasn't the torn reminder of her flight. She found him by the stream, repairing what looked like a fishing weir. He glanced up at her approach, and something flickered in those amber eyes before his expression settled back to calm. "Better?" he asked. "Much." She settled carefully on a smooth boulder, mindful of her tender feet. "I feel almost human again." Human is a good start. He returned to his work, strong hands weaving willow branches with practiced ease. "Though my grandfather would say there are better things to be." "Like what?" "Like yourself. Whoever that is when fear stops driving the choices." Clara considered this, watching the water flow past. "I'm not sure I remember who that is anymore." "Then you have the gift of discovery ahead." He secured the last branch, testing the weir's strength. "Most people never get to choose who they become. They simply accept what others tell them to be. Is that what you did? Choose who you became?" His hands stilled. "In a way, I chose which voices to follow. My Apache grandfather, who taught me to fight. My Mexican mother, who taught me to heal. My white grandmother, who taught me letters and numbers and the strange ways of Eastern thinking." A wry smile. "The difficulty is when those voices disagree. And when they do, then I come here." He gestured at the valley. "And listen to older voices, until I remember which thoughts are mine and which were given to me." Clara understood that more than she could express. How many of her thoughts were her own anymore, and how many were Samuel's voice in her head, telling her what she was worth, what she deserved, what she could never be. The sun climbed higher, warming the valley. Koa showed her edible plants growing along the stream, pointed out the different birds that called this place home. His knowledge seemed endless, but never boastful, simply shared, like gifts freely given. By afternoon, Clara's strength was flagging. Koa noticed before she could hide it, guiding her back to the shelter without making her ask. She lay on the simple bed, watching dust motes dance in the slanted light, feeling safer than she had in years. "Rest," he said from the doorway. "I'll be nearby." Why? The question she'd asked before, but needed to ask again. "Why are you helping me?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then, when I was 12 summers, soldiers came to our camp. My mother hid me in the brush, told me to run. I watched." His voice carried old pain, carefully controlled. "I watched her refuse to tell them where the men had gone hunting. Watched what they did to make her talk. Watched her die still refusing." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." She died free. He said simply. "Died making her own choice. That's why I help you. Clara Morrison. Because I recognize the look of someone choosing freedom over safety. Choosing the unknown over the unendurable." He met her eyes directly. "And if he comes, when he comes, he'll find that some things can't be taken by force. Some things can only be given, or kept." The promise in his words wrapped around her like armor. Clara closed her eyes, feeling tears slip free, not from sadness, but from something else. Relief, maybe, or hope. The sensation was so unfamiliar she couldn't name it. When she opened her eyes again, Koa was gone, but his presence lingered. Through the window, she could see him moving through the valley, checking snares, gathering plants, maintaining the subtle barriers that kept this place hidden, guarding her without caging her. For the first time since her wedding day, Clara began to believe she might survive this, not just in body, but in spirit. Not just survive, but perhaps even live again. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, she let herself drift back to sleep, knowing that someone watched over her who understood the price of freedom and considered it worth paying. In this hidden valley where ancient spirits dwelled, She was not Clara Morrison, beaten wife and runaway. She was simply Clara, and that was enough. For now, it was more than enough. It was everything. The days in the valley took on a rhythm Clara had forgotten existed. Wake with the birds, sleep when darkness fell. Let hunger and thirst, not clocks and expectations, dictate the hours between. Her feet healed faster than seemed possible, the angry wounds fading to pink scars under Koa's patient care. But it was her spirit that underwent the greater transformation, unfurling like a flower after too long in shadow. On the fourth morning, she found Koa by the stream, cleaning a rifle with the same meticulous attention he gave to everything. "Teach me," she said without preamble. He looked up, amber eyes assessing. "What would you learn?" "Everything." The word came out fiercer than intended. How to find water, how to make fire, how to shoot, how to survive without depending on anyone else's mercy. "Independence is illusion," he said, returning to his task. "Even the eagle depends on wind. Even the mountain depends on stone. We all need something. Someone. Then teach me to need less, to need differently." Clara sat beside him, careful of her still tender feet. "I spent 3 years needing someone who used that need as a weapon. Never again." Koa was quiet for a long moment, hands moving surely over the rifle's mechanism. Then he set it aside and faced her fully. "What I teach won't make you safe. Knowledge can become its own burden. Skills carry responsibility. I'm not asking for safety. I'm asking for choice." Something shifted in his expression. Approval, perhaps, or recognition. "Then we begin." He started with water, leading her through the valley to show her the signs, the particular green of cottonwoods that marked underground streams, the way certain birds flew at dawn toward hidden springs, how to read the land's contours for places where water gathered. "See here," he said, kneeling by a dry wash. "Old water path. Follow upstream. You find where it begins. Follow down. You find where it pools." His finger traced the subtle signs in sand and stone. Water has memory. It returns to paths it knows. Clara crouched beside him, studying the unremarkable ground until gradually she began to see what he saw, the slightly different color of sand where moisture lingered, the way small stones aligned with past currents. In the desert, everything speaks if you know how to listen. Koa continued, "Survival isn't about conquering, it's about conversation." They spent the morning that way, Koa pointing out the edible plants, prickly pear cactus with its sweet fruit and paddle-shaped leaves that could be cooked, mesquite pods that ground into flour, the small seeds of grasses that could sustain life when nothing else remained. He showed her which plants healed and which harmed, how to test unknown vegetation safely, where to dig for roots that stored water. "Your hands will learn," he said when she struggled to extract cactus fruit without catching thorns. "The body remembers what the mind forgets." By midday, the sun drove them to shelter, but the lessons continued, in the adobe's shade. Koa taught her to build fire without matches, the patient work of finding the right wood, creating tinder from inner bark, the ancient friction methods his grandfather had shown him. Clara's first attempts produced only sore hands and frustration. The bow drill slipped, the tinder wouldn't catch. Sweat stung her eyes, but Koa simply corrected her grip, adjusted her posture, demonstrated again with infinite patience. "Fire is alive," he explained. "You don't force it, you invite it. Offer it food, dry grass, then twigs, then branches. Shelter it from wind until it's strong. Respect it always. Or it becomes enemy instead of friend." On her dozenth attempt, a tiny spiral of smoke rewarded her efforts. Clara held her breath, feeding the ember with trembling hands until flame bloomed like a small sun. The triumph that flooded her was out of proportion to the simple act, but Koa's approving nod made her feel like she'd climbed a mountain. "First fire is always sweetest," he said. "Remember this feeling when frustration comes. Everything worth knowing demands patience." The afternoon brought different lessons. Koa set up targets, circles drawn on flat stones, and introduced her to firearms. First, basic safety that he drilled into her with unexpected sternness. "A weapon is neutral," he said, placing the unloaded rifle in her hands. "It becomes what the holder makes it, protection or persecution, food bringer or life taker. Respect it like fire. Never point at anything you don't intend to destroy. Never touch the trigger until you're ready to accept the consequences." The rifle was heavier than Clara expected, awkward in her unpracticed grip. Koa adjusted her stance, showed her how to nestle the stock against her shoulder, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe. Don't fight the weight, become partners with it. The rifle wants to be steady, let it teach you stillness. Her first shots went wild, the recoil surprising her even though he'd warned her to expect it. But gradually, she began to understand the relationship between breath and trigger, between stillness and accuracy. "I was a terrible shot as a boy," Kowai admitted, reloading for her. "My Apache cousins mocked me, said I couldn't hit a mountain if I stood on it. But my Mexican uncle told me something. The target doesn't matter, the shooter matters. Master yourself, and the rest follows." By the time shadows lengthened, Clara had progressed from missing entirely to hitting the outer edges of the targets. Her shoulder ached from the recoil. Her hands smelled of gunpowder, but she felt more capable than she had in years. That evening, as they prepared the simple meal of rabbit Koa had snared and greens Clara had gathered herself, she asked him about his past, the boy who couldn't shoot, who grew into this man of quiet competence. "I lived between worlds," he said, turning the rabbit on its spit. "Too Apache for the Mexicans, too Mexican for the Apache, too brown for the Americans. Each group wanted me to choose, to cut away the parts that didn't fit their vision. What did you do?" "Refused." He smiled at the memory. "It caused no end of trouble. My Apache grandfather said I was stubborn as a mule. My Mexican mother said I was proud as a rooster. My white grandmother said I was difficult as her own son had been." The smile softened. "They were all right. Where are they now, your family?" "Gone to their various spirits." No self-pity in the words, just fact. Grandfather in battle, mother to sickness, grandmother to age, but their voices remain. He touched his temple. "Here, always arguing, still trying to guide me." Clara understood that kind of presence, though in her case, the voice was one she desperately wanted to silence. Samuel's words still echoed sometimes, telling her she was worthless, stupid. Fortunate he'd chosen her at all. She pushed the thoughts away, focusing on the present. "Will you teach me your languages?" she asked impulsively. "Apache, Spanish. Language is more than words." Koa cautioned. "It's thought patterns, world view. Apache has no word for own in the way English uses it. Spanish has 20 ways to say love, each meaning something different. Learning language changes how you see." "Good. I want to see differently." So that became part of their routine, too. As Clara's body strengthened, her mind absorbed new ways of thinking. Koa taught her Apache words for the natural world. Tu for water, gocha for fire, gaus for sky. Spanish came easier, its rhythms familiar from her teaching days when several Mexican children had attended her school. But the most valuable lessons were the unspoken ones. The way Koa never moved suddenly around her, always announcing his presence. How he asked permission before tending her healing feet, though the wounds barely needed attention now. The respect he showed for her space, her thoughts, her silences. One evening, as they sat by the fire Clara had built herself, she found herself telling him about Samuel. Not the brutal details, those stayed locked inside, but the slow erosion of self that came with such a marriage. "He was charming at first," she said, "watching flames dance. Brought me books of poetry. Praised my teaching. Said he wanted a wife who could think, not just decoration." A bitter laugh escaped. He wanted a wife who could think just enough to appreciate his superiority, but not enough to question it. Control wearing the mask of love. Koa's voice held understanding. "The cruelest trap, because you cage yourself, thinking it's choice." "Yes." The simple acknowledgement loosened something in her chest. "By the time I understood, I was 50 miles from anywhere, no money of my own, no friends who weren't his friends first. The law says a husband can discipline his wife. Who would help me? You helped yourself. By running into the desert to die? By choosing the possibility of death over the certainty of spiritual destruction. He added wood to the fire, sparks rising like prayers. That takes courage most never find. They sat in companionable silence, the fire crackling between them. Clara felt the weight of the derringer she now carried. Koa had insisted, showing her how to conceal it, how to draw quickly. Last resort, he'd said. But sometimes last resorts are all we have. I should hate him, she said suddenly. Samuel, but mostly I feel empty, like he's a force of nature, a tornado or wildfire. You don't hate disasters. You just try to survive them. Hate is another kind of cage. Koa observed. It chains you to what you despise. Better to feel nothing, best to feel free. Are you free? The question slipped out before she could stop it. He considered this. Amber eyes reflecting firelight. More than most, less than the hawk. But freedom isn't a destination. Clara, it's a practice, daily chosen. Today, I chose to teach instead of hunt alone. You chose to learn instead of hide. Tomorrow we'll choose again. What if I choose to stay? Her heart hammered at her boldness. Not forever, but until I'm stronger. This valley shelters those who need it. His expression gave nothing away. Stay until you hear your own voice clearly again. Then decide. That night, Clara lay awake despite her exhaustion, mind replaying the day's lessons. Her shoulder ached from shooting. Her hands bore new calluses from fire-making. Her tongue stumbled over Apache words. But beneath the physical changes, something deeper shifted. For the first time in years, she was learning not what someone else demanded, but what she chose to know. When sleep finally came, she dreamed not of Samuel's pursuing hoofbeats, but of clear water and patient hands, of words in 3 languages that all meant some variation of free. She woke once to coyote song and smiled, recognizing their voices individually now as Koa had taught her. The young female with the high yip, the old male whose call cracked at the edges. Everything had a voice if you learned to listen. Even, especially, the quiet voice inside that had been silent so long she'd forgotten its sound. But here in this hidden valley, protected by ancient spirits, and a man who understood the price of choosing your own path, that voice grew stronger each day. Clara closed her eyes and listened to it whisper, "You're going to survive this. You're going to be more than you were. You're going to live." And for the first time, she believed it. The peace of the valley shattered on the 10th morning like glass hitting stone. Clara was practicing with the rifle, her groupings now respectable at 50 yards, when Koa suddenly appeared beside her, moving with an urgency she'd never seen from him. "Riders," he said quietly. 3, maybe 4, still beyond the outer canyons, but coming this way. Clara's blood turned to ice water. The rifle suddenly felt like lead in her hands. Samuel. Perhaps not. Koa's eyes scanned the horizon, reading signs invisible to her. But they move with purpose, not wandering. Someone told them where to look. Fear crashed over her in waves, but underneath, something else stirred. Anger. 10 days of freedom, of remembering who she could be. And now this. How long? By sunset, maybe sooner if they know the shortcuts. He took the rifle from her nerveless fingers, checking it with swift efficiency. You have choices to make. What choices? If it's Samuel, you can run. I know paths they'll never find. Can get you to Mexico in 4 days. You can hide. There are caves in these walls where Apache women sheltered their children from soldiers. Or, he handed the rifle back to her. You can stand. Clara's hands shook as she took the weapon. I can't fight Samuel. You don't understand what he's capable of. I understand he's a man who bleeds like any other. Koa's voice carried no bravado, just fact. But this isn't about fighting. It's about choosing who you are when fear comes calling. They returned to the shelter quickly, Koa gathering supplies with practiced efficiency. Clara watched him, her mind spinning. Run, hide, or stand. Each option terrified her in different ways. There's something else, Koa said, strapping on a gun belt she'd never seen him wear. One rider sits his horse like Apache, but wrong, like someone playing at being Apache. Samuel hires trackers sometimes. Apache who work for whiskey money. Koa's expression hardened. Then he brings shame with him as well as threat. He paused in his preparations, meeting her eyes. Whatever you choose, Clara, I'll help, but choose as yourself, not as the frightened woman he tried to make you. Clara sank onto a wooden bench, mind racing. The woman who'd fled into the desert 10 days ago would have run without question, would have done anything to avoid confrontation. But that woman hadn't known how to build fire from nothing, hadn't felt the satisfaction of hitting a target through patient practice, hadn't discovered she could learn new languages and new ways of seeing. If I run, she said slowly, I'll always be running. In Mexico, California, anywhere, I'll always be looking over my shoulder. Perhaps, or perhaps distance brings its own freedom. And if I hide, then you survive. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it's everything. But not this time. The words surprised her even as she spoke them. I'm tired of being a rabbit. Koa, tired of living in fear of the hawk's shadow. Something flickered in his amber eyes. Pride. Maybe. Or concern. Standing doesn't mean fighting. There are many ways to show strength. Then help me find one that keeps us both alive. The plan they developed was simple, perhaps too simple. But as Koa explained, complexity bred failure in desperate moments. Clara would meet the riders openly, neither hiding nor threatening. She would assert her rights as a free woman, demand they leave. If Samuel had brought law with him, a sheriff, a marshal, she would go peacefully but publicly, making clear she left under duress. And if he brought only hired men? Clara asked. Checking the derringer Koa insisted she keep concealed. Then we learn what kind of men they are. His hand rested briefly on his knife hilt. Not all who hire out for such work lack honor entirely. Some can be reasoned with. Some can be shamed. Some... He didn't finish, but Clara understood. They prepared the valley's defenses, subtle things that wouldn't appear aggressive but would provide advantage if needed. Koa positioned rifles in hidden spots, created natural barriers that would funnel approaches, set up sight lines. Clara watched him work, this man of peace preparing for potential war with the same careful attention he gave to healing. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, they heard them, horses' hooves echoing off canyon walls, the jingle of spurs and tack. Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break free. But she forced herself to stand straight beside Koa at the valley's entrance. 4 riders emerged from the narrow passage, Samuel at the lead, his gray eyes cold as winter stone, wearing the same black coat he favored for town business. Behind him rode 2 men Clara didn't recognize, rough-looking sorts with the marks of those who lived by violence. And last, slouching in his saddle with a whiskey bottle glinting at his hip, an Apache who looked like he'd forgotten what pride meant. Samuel's eyes found Clara immediately, and his lips curved in that smile she'd learned to fear, the one that preceded pain presented as lesson. Hello, Clara. His voice carried the same cultured tones that had once charmed her, now edged with possession. You've led us quite a chase, Mr. Morrison. She was proud her voice didn't shake. You're not welcome here. Please leave. He laughed, the sound scraping like rusty metal. Leave. I've come to collect my property. Mrs. Morrison, surely you haven't forgotten you're my wife. I haven't forgotten anything. Clara lifted her chin, finding strength in Koa's steady presence beside her, including the bruises, the locked doors, the nights you... She stopped, refusing to give him the satisfaction of her pain. I'm not returning with you. Samuel's eyes narrowed, taking in her changed appearance, the sun-darkened skin, the practical clothing, the way she stood without cowering. His gaze shifted to Koa, and his expression hardened further. I see. Found yourself a savage to rut with. He leaned forward in his saddle. Judge Harrington will be very interested to hear how my wife abandoned her marriage vows for some half-breed's bed. Heat flooded Clara's face, But before she could respond, Koa spoke, his voice carrying quiet authority. "You dishonor yourself with such words. She came here seeking sanctuary from brutality. Nothing more. Don't speak to me, savage." Samuel's hand moved toward his gun. "I'm addressing my wife. Former wife." Clara stepped forward, surprising everyone, including herself. "I may not have papers yet, but our marriage ended the night you tied me to a bed and told me I'd learn obedience or die trying." The hired men exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. One, a weathered man with kind eyes that seemed at odds with his profession, shifted in his saddle. Samuel's facade of civility cracked. "Jebediah, Marcus, I'm paying you to retrieve my property, not listen to her lies. Do your job." The weathered man, Jebediah, cleared his throat. "Mr. Morrison, you said she was simple-minded, needed protection. This woman seems plenty capable of deciding for herself. I'm paying you to follow orders, not think." Samuel's voice went sharp. "Joseph, you tracked her here. Tell these fools what Apache do to white women." The drunk Apache stirred, bloodshot eyes focusing with difficulty. When he spoke, his words slurred but carried unexpected weight. "This place, this is Sacred Valley. Old medicine. We shouldn't be here." "Superstitious nonsense." Samuel dismounted, his movements sharp with anger. "If none of you have the spine for this, I'll handle my wife myself." He strode toward Clara, and she saw her nightmare walking in daylight. The man who'd systematically destroyed her sense of self, who'd made her doubt her own worth until escape seemed impossible. But as he reached for her, Koa moved. It happened so fast Clara almost missed it. One moment Samuel was grabbing for her arm. The next, he was on the ground. Koa's knife pressed against his throat. The Apache's knee planted firmly on his chest. "Touch her again," Koa growled, his voice carrying the promise of violence barely leashed. "And I'll bury you here. This ground has drunk blood before. It won't notice yours." The hired men went for their guns, but Koa didn't even look at them. "Your employer lied. Ask yourselves if his money is worth dying for his lies. Let him up." Jebediah's voice was calm but firm. He'd drawn his gun, but pointed it at the ground. "Not at Koa. Let's all take a breath before this gets past fixing." Samuel's face had gone purple with rage and lack of air. Koa eased the pressure slightly, but didn't move the blade. "He threatens what's under my protection. Apache law says I can kill him for that. Mexican law says the same. Even American law recognizes a man's right to defend the innocent." "She's my wife," Samuel gasped. "She's a person." Clara found her voice again, stronger now. "Not property, not something you own. A person who chooses to stay here rather than return to your cruelty." Jebediah holstered his weapon slowly. "Marcus, I'm thinking we made a mistake taking this job." The other hired man nodded, relief clear on his face. Man said retrieve his addled wife who wandered off confused. Didn't say nothing about dragging off a woman with clear mind and good reasons. Joseph, the Apache tracker, slid from his horse with surprising grace for someone so drunk. He approached slowly, careful not to threaten, and looked down at Samuel pinned beneath Koa's blade. "I know you," he said to Koa in Apache. Clara understood enough now to follow. "Son of Maria Morales and Nathan Birdsong. Your grandfather was Goes with Thunder." "I am his grandson," Koa confirmed in the same language, never taking his eyes off Samuel. Joseph's weathered face transformed. "Then I've shamed myself doubly, taking white man's whiskey money to violate sacred ground and threaten the grandson of a war chief." He turned to the hired men, switching to English. "We leave, now. This place is protected by old agreements. To spill blood here brings curse on 7 generations. You superstitious drunk." Samuel's attempt to shout came out as a wheeze. "I paid you. Keep your money." Joseph pulled the leather pouch from his belt, throwing it so coins scattered in the dust. "It already cost too much." Jebediah dismounted, moving carefully to show no threat. "Let him up, friend. We'll take him out of here. Make sure he doesn't come back. You have my word." Koa studied the older man's face, then nodded slowly. He rose in one fluid motion, keeping his blade ready. Samuel scrambled to his feet, hatred twisting his features into something inhuman. "This isn't over," he snarled at Clara. "You're my wife by law and God. I'll go to every judge in the territory. You'll leave." Jebediah's voice cut through the threats like a blade of its own. "You'll leave, and you'll count yourself lucky this man showed restraint. I've seen what Apache do to men who hurt women under their protection. A knife to the throat is a kindness compared to that." He and Marcus flanked Samuel, not quite touching him but making clear he had no choice. Samuel's gray eyes found Clara one more time, promising retribution without words. But for the first time, she met that gaze without flinching. "Goodbye, Samuel." The words came out steady, final. "Don't come back." They marched him to his horse, Jebediah keeping a firm hand on the reins. As they prepared to leave, the weathered gunman looked back at Clara. "Ma'am, for what it's worth, I got a daughter about your age. If any man treated her like, well, I'd want her to have the courage you're showing." He touched his hat. "We won't be taking any more jobs from Mr. Morrison." Joseph lingered a moment longer, swaying slightly but seeming more sober than before. He addressed Koa formally in Apache, then switched to English for Clara's benefit. "I ask forgiveness for bringing dishonor to this place. The whiskey, it makes me forget who I was, who my fathers were." He straightened with visible effort. "No more. Your courage shames me into remembering." Then they were gone, the sound of hooves fading back through the canyon. Clara stood frozen, unable to quite believe it was over. Her legs suddenly gave out, and she would have fallen if Koa hadn't caught her, lowering her gently to sit on a nearby boulder. "It's done," he said quietly. "You stood, you chose, you won. He'll come back." Her voice shook now that the immediate danger had passed. "You don't know Samuel. He can't bear to lose, especially not to—" She caught herself before repeating his ugly words. "Perhaps, but he'll think twice now. Men like him are cowards beneath the cruelty. He's learned you're no longer alone, no longer helpless." Koa cleaned his blade methodically before sheathing it. "And word will spread. Joseph will tell others what happened here. The story will grow with each telling. Soon, Samuel Morrison will be known as the man who tried to drag his wife from sacred ground and was shamed for it. Reputation matters to him more than anything," Clara realized slowly. "More than money, more than possession. If people knew the truth about why I left, then perhaps it's time that truth was told." Koa helped her to her feet. "But that's tomorrow's choice. Today, you faced your demon and didn't run. That's enough victory for one day." As they walked back to the shelter, Clara felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. She'd spent 3 years learning to make herself small, to avoid notice, to survive by submission. Today, she'd stood tall, spoken her truth, refused to be diminished. Samuel might return, probably would return, but he'd find a different woman waiting. Not a rabbit to chase, but someone who'd remembered her own strength. "Thank you," she said as they reached the doorway, "for standing with me, for being willing to keep my promise." Koa's slight smile returned. "I told you that first night. Anyone who touched you again would meet the desert's justice. I keep my words, even against 4 armed men, especially then. Though I'm glad Jebediah proved honorable. Fighting is last choice, always, but some things are worth the risk." "What things?" The question came out softer than intended. Koa was quiet for a long moment, amber eyes thoughtful. "Freedom, dignity, the right to choose your own path." He paused. "You." The single word hung between them, weighted with possibilities neither was ready to explore. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but not from embarrassment. This was something else, something that had been growing quietly in the sanctuary of the valley. A recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who'd found each other against all odds. But now wasn't the time. Not with Samuel's threats still echoing, not with her newfound courage still fragile as spring ice. So she simply nodded, understanding passing between them without need for words. That night, as they shared a meal by the fire, Clara felt the last chains of her old life breaking. She'd faced Samuel Morrison and hadn't broken, hadn't run, hadn't surrendered. The woman who'd fled into the desert was gone. In her place sat someone new, scarred but not defeated, cautious but not cowering. Someone who might, given time and continued courage, learn to be truly free. Dawn came with mist clinging to the valley floor. The world wrapped in gray silk that muffled sound and blurred edges. Clara woke to find Koa already gone, his absence like a missing note in a familiar song. After the intensity of yesterday's confrontation, the quiet felt ominous rather than peaceful. She dressed quickly in the practical clothes that had become her daily wear, checking the derringer out of habit that was still new. Through the window, she could see no sign of Koa, only the ghostly shapes of cottonwoods emerging from fog. A sound made her freeze, horses approaching through the canyon. Her heart hammered as she grabbed the rifle, checking its load with hands that had grown steady through practice. But these hoofbeats were different from yesterday's measured approach. These came fast, urgent, accompanied by voices calling out in distress. Clara positioned herself behind cover, rifle ready, just as Koa had taught her. The mist parted to reveal two riders, Jebediah Cross from yesterday, supporting another figure who slumped forward in the saddle. Blood stained both their clothes. "Help!" Jebediah's weathered face was tight with strain. "Please, we need help!" Clara emerged cautiously, rifle lowered but ready. As the riders drew closer, she gasped. The injured man was Joseph, the Apache tracker, and he'd been shot, a dark stain spreading across his left side. What happened? She was already moving to help as Jebediah half fell from his horse, struggling to keep Joseph from sliding to the ground. "Morrison!" Jebediah gasped. "The bastard ambushed us 5 miles out, shot Joseph when he tried to stop him coming back here. Marcus is dead!" Clara's blood turned cold, but her hands remained steady as she helped ease Joseph down. "Where's Samuel now?" "Coming." Jebediah's eyes were wild with exhaustion and fear. "Maybe an hour behind, maybe less." "He's got 6 men with him this time. Hired killers from Silver City. Lost him in the canyons, but he'll find the way." Koa materialized from the mist like a spirit, taking in the scene with one comprehensive glance. Without a word, he lifted Joseph with surprising gentleness, carrying him toward the shelter. "Bring water," he commanded. "Clean cloth, my medicine bag from the high shelf." They worked in tense efficiency, Koa's hands sure and quick as he examined the wound. The bullet had passed through, missing vital organs but leaving damage enough. Joseph drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering in Apache about dishonored ancestors and whiskey demons. "Will he live?" Clara asked, holding Joseph steady as Koa cleaned the wound. "If infection doesn't take him, if we have time to let him heal." Koa's jaw tightened. "How many men?" 6 plus Morrison." Jebediah slumped against the wall, looking every one of his 50-odd years. Hard cases, every one. The kind who enjoy their work. Morrison promised them extra for... He glanced at Clara, then away. "For bringing you back breathing but not necessarily whole." Clara's hands stilled on the bandages. The careful controls Samuel had always maintained in public had finally cracked completely. He no longer cared about appearances, about what people might say. That made him infinitely more dangerous. "You should go," she told Koa as he tied off Joseph's bandages. "This isn't your fight." Koa's amber eyes flashed dangerously. "You insult me with such words. This valley is under my protection. You are under my protection." Joseph shed blood defending that protection. Their fight became mine the moment Morrison pointed guns this direction. 7 men, Koa, armed killers. Numbers mean less than terrain and preparation. He stood, wiping blood from his hands. "Mr. Cross, can you shoot?" "Well enough." Jebediah straightened despite his exhaustion. "I ain't running, if that's what you're asking. Man paid me to do wrong. Least I can do is try to make it right." Koa nodded approval. "Then we have 3 guns and knowledge of the ground. They have numbers and arrogance. I've faced worse odds." They prepared with grim efficiency. Koa revealed defenses Clara hadn't known existed, hidden positions among the rocks, cached weapons, paths that led to dead ends where attackers could be trapped. He gave Jebediah quick lessons in the valley's geography, showing him where to position himself for maximum advantage. "They'll expect us to ford up in the shelter," Koa explained, sketching diagrams in the dirt. "Let them think that, but we'll be here and here." He marked positions that commanded the approach. "Make them come through the narrow places where numbers don't matter." Clara found herself assigned to a natural blind formed by fallen rocks, with clear sight lines to the valley entrance. The rifle felt familiar in her hands now, its weight reassuring rather than burdensome. 10 days ago, she couldn't have imagined herself here, preparing to fight rather than flee. "I'm not a killer," she said when Koa checked her position. "Then don't kill, wound, discourage. Make them reconsider the cost of Morrison's obsession." He adjusted her sight line slightly. "But if it comes to your life or theirs, don't hesitate. The dead have no use for clean consciences." The mist began to lift as the sun climbed higher, revealing the valley in stages like a theater curtain rising. Clara could hear them now, horses and harsh voices echoing off canyon walls. Her mouth went dry, but her hands stayed steady on the rifle. They came as expected, straight up the main approach, confident in their numbers. Samuel rode in the center, protected by his hired guns, even at distance. Clara could see the change in him, something wild in his posture, dangerous in its abandonment of restraint. "Clara!" His voice boomed across the valley. "One last chance. Come out now, and I'll only punish you moderately. Make me dig you out, and I'll let these men have their fun before dragging what's left home." Bile rose in her throat, but Clara held position as Koa had instructed. "Let them come. Let them enter the killing ground." The riders advanced cautiously despite their numbers, professionals who recognized the danger of enclosed terrain. They'd made it halfway to the shelter when Koa's first shot cracked out, taking the lead rider's horse in the shoulder. The animal screamed, rearing and throwing its rider before bolting back toward the entrance. "It's a trap!" someone shouted. But too late. Jebediah's rifle spoke from the opposite ridge, sending another man diving for cover. The organized advance dissolved into chaos as bullets whined off rocks from unexpected angles. Clara sighted carefully, as Koa had taught her. Breathe in, half out, squeeze. Her shot took a rider in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. Not a kill shot, but he wouldn't be fighting anymore today. Return fire exploded against her position, chips of rock stinging her face. She ducked, counting as Koa had shown her, then popped up in a different spot to fire again. This shot went wide, but it kept their heads down, kept them from advancing. "Flank them!" Samuel's voice cut through the gunfire. "Rodriguez, take 2 men up the north wall!" But Koa had anticipated this. Clara heard his rifle bark 3 times in quick succession, and the flanking attempt died before it truly began. 2 men lay groaning in the open, the third scrambling back to cover. "This ain't worth dying for," one of the hired guns shouted. "You didn't say nothing about fighting Apache in their own ground." "I'm paying you to fight." Samuel's control cracked further. "Get that woman. Get her yourself." The desertion started with 1 man breaking for the entrance, then another. Soon half the remaining force was in retreat, unwilling to trade their lives for Samuel's money. Bullets followed them out, Koa ensuring they'd think twice before returning. That left Samuel and 2 others, men too stupid or too proud to run. They huddled behind what cover they could find, occasionally firing to keep the defenders' heads down. "You think you've won?" Samuel called out, his cultured voice ragged at the edges. "I'll burn you out. I'll come back with 20 men, 30. You'll never know peace. Clara, never." That's when Joseph stirred in the shelter behind them. Despite his wound, the Apache had dragged himself to the doorway, propping himself against the frame with his rifle across his knees. "Morrison!" His voice cracked but carried. "You brought dishonor to sacred ground. You spilled blood where blood shouldn't flow. The spirits mark you. Shut up, you drunk savage." Joseph spoke in Apache then, his words flowing like water over stone. Clara understood enough to recognize it as a curse, or perhaps a prophecy. The two remaining hired guns exchanged nervous glances, and one suddenly broke. Running for his horse without a backward look, now it was 3 against 1, Samuel and his last supporter pinned down with nowhere to go. The sun climbed toward noon, heat beginning to shimmer off the rocks. Clara could see Samuel clearly now, see the desperation that had replaced his usual cold control. "Mr. Morrison," Jebediah called out. "This is done. You lost. Take what dignity you got left and ride away. I don't take orders from traitors." "Then take some advice." Koa's voice rang out, calm and deadly. "Every minute you remain dishonors you further. Your men have abandoned you. Your wife has chosen freedom over fear. You have nothing here but the death you seem eager to find." The last hired gun had heard enough. "I'm out," he called, standing slowly with hands raised. "This ain't my fight no more. You coward." Samuel turned his gun on his own man, but the professional was faster, diving and rolling as Samuel's shot went wild. Then he was running, leaving Samuel truly alone. For a long moment, silence settled over the valley like dust. Clara could see her husband, former husband in all but law, crouched behind his boulder, gun in hand, face twisted with rage and disbelief. The man who'd controlled every aspect of her life for 3 years, reduced to a cornered animal. "Samuel," she called out, surprising herself. "Go home. Find another wife if you need property so badly. But leave me in peace. You're mine." The words came out as a snarl. "Mine by law. Mine by right. Mine by—" His words cut off as he made his fatal mistake, breaking cover to charge toward her position. Gun raised, face contorted with murderous intent. 3 rifles spoke as one. Samuel Morrison crumpled mid-stride, his momentum carrying him forward a few more steps before he fell face first in the desert dust. He twitched once, then lay still, his blood soaking into ground that had seen such endings before. Clara lowered her rifle with shaking hands. She didn't know which shot had been fatal, hers, Koa's, or Jebediah's. Perhaps all 3. Perhaps none individually. It didn't matter. What mattered was the silence that followed, the absence of the voice that had defined her world through fear for so long. She climbed down from her position on unsteady legs, drawn toward the still form despite herself. Koa met her halfway, his presence solid and reassuring. "It's over," he said simply. Clara looked down at Samuel's body, waiting to feel something, regret, sadness, even satisfaction. Instead, there was only emptiness, like a tooth finally pulled after days of pain, the absence more noticeable than any emotion. "He was right about one thing," she said quietly. "By law, I'm still his wife. His property passes to me now. The ranch, the cattle, the money he loved more than any living thing." "What will you do?" Clara considered this, watching as Jebediah checked the wounded men, offering water despite their recent hostility. Joseph had managed to stand, leaning heavily against the doorframe but upright through sheer will. Sell it, she decided. Every acre, every cow, every stick of furniture that carries his memory. Use the money for something better. Such as? She looked around the valley, at the ancient drawings on canyon walls, at the clear stream that promised life, at the shelter that had given her sanctuary when she needed it most. Then at Koa, who'd offered her protection without possession, strength without dominance. "A school," she said, the idea crystallizing as she spoke, "for children who have no other chance. Apache children forced onto reservations, Mexican children caught between worlds, white children too poor for town schools, a place where they can learn without being told they're less than others." Koa's rare smile transformed his face. The desert would approve, knowledge flowing like water, giving life where it's needed. "Will you help?" The question carried more weight than the simple word suggested. "Try to stop me." As the sun reached its zenith, they worked together to deal with the aftermath, tending wounds, gathering weapons, preparing the single body for burial. Samuel would rest in the desert he'd never understood, far from the ranch that had been his kingdom and Clara's prison. By evening, Jebediah and Joseph were ready to travel, the tracker insisting he could ride despite his wound. "This one saved my life," Joseph said, gesturing to Jebediah. "Threw himself between Morrison's gun and me. I owe debt now. We're square." Jebediah protested. "I brought trouble here. Least I could do was help fix it." "Where will you go?" Clara asked. The older man shrugged. "Wherever men need honest gun work, I suppose. Though might be I'll be picker about who I work for now." "I might have work," Clara said slowly. "A ranch to sell, belongings to transport, later a school to build. I'll need good men, trustworthy men." Jebediah's weathered face cracked in a grin. "Ma'am, I believe I'm available." As the two men prepared to leave, Joseph to spread word of what had happened, Jebediah to begin the legal processes Clara would need. Koa drew the Apache tracker aside. They spoke quietly in their shared language, and Clara saw Joseph straighten, some of his old pride returning despite the whiskey damage. "What did you tell him?" she asked after they'd gone. "That the desert offers second chances to those who seek them honestly, that a man who remembers his honor can reclaim it." Koa paused. "And that if he helps spread the true story of what happened here, Samuel Morrison's name will carry the shame he tried to put on others." They stood together as sunset painted the valley in shades of gold and crimson. The day's violence seemed distant already, absorbed by ancient stone that had witnessed so much across the centuries. Clara felt the last of her fear dissolving, leaving space for something new to grow. "I should go to town soon," she said. "Face the legal matters, claim what's mine by law so I can give it away freely. When you're ready, the valley isn't going anywhere." "Neither am I," Clara said firmly. "This is home now. Whatever else I build, wherever the school rises, this valley will be part of it, a place where children can learn that strength doesn't require cruelty, that different bloods can flow together like streams joining a river." Koa took her hand, his calluses rough against her teacher-soft palm. But she had calluses of her own now, earned through survival and choice. "Then we build together," he said. "Your vision, my knowledge, creating something neither could make alone." As darkness gathered, bringing the desert's night music of coyotes and owls, Clara stood in the entrance of the valley that had sheltered her, saved her, remade her. Samuel Morrison lay buried beyond the canyon walls, his threat as dead as his body. The woman he'd tried to break stood free, preparing to use his hoarded wealth to lift others from their own prisons. Justice came in many forms. Tonight, it wore the shape of a teacher with scarred feet and steady hands, planning a future where no child would grow up believing they deserved less than dignity, less than choice, less than freedom. The desert approved, wind singing through the canyon like a blessing. And somewhere in that song, Clara heard her mother's voice at last, not warning but celebrating. "You found your way. Daughter, you found your way home." 3 months had passed since Samuel Morrison's burial in the desert sand. The legal matters, complex as Jebediah had warned, were finally settled. Clara was recognized as Morrison's widow and sole heir, his considerable fortune passing to her despite the scandal that surrounded his death. The territorial judge, after hearing testimony from Jebediah and 2 of the fleeing gunmen, ruled it self-defense. "A man who brings violence to sacred Apache ground," he'd said, "shouldn't be surprised when violence answers." Now Clara stood in the valley's morning light, teaching letters to an unexpected student. Koa sat cross-legged on a flat stone, brow furrowed in concentration as he carefully copied the alphabet she'd written in the dirt. "Your hands know more important things than making these marks," Clara said, watching him struggle with the unfamiliar motions. "My hands know one kind of creation," he replied without looking up. "You offer another. Both matter." It had started simply, Clara practicing her teaching on willing rocks and trees, preparing for the school that existed only in plans and dreams. Koa had watched from his usual quiet distance until one day he'd asked, "These marks that hold words, could you teach them to one whose eyes see only pictures?" Now, their mornings held this new ritual. Clara sharing the gift of written language while Koa taught her to read the desert's own alphabet. Tracks in sand. The way plants turned with seasons. How clouds promised rain or wind. Try again, Clara encouraged, kneeling beside him. See how the A stands like a shelter? 2 lines leaning together, one across for strength. His next attempt was better, more confident. In Apache, he said, still focused on his work. We have no written words. Stories live in memory, passed from mouth to ear. But I see the power in what you teach. Words that travel without speaking, thoughts that outlive the thinker. My mother used to say reading was freedom. Clara replied, no one can imprison a mind that knows how to travel through books. Then I learned freedom from you, as you learned it from the desert. Their eyes met, and Clara felt that increasingly familiar warmth. Not the sharp heat of new attraction, but something deeper, like coals that burn steady through the night. 3 months of working together, planning together. Simply being together had woven something between them neither had quite named. The sound of approaching horses broke the moment, but these arrivals were expected. Jebediah Cross leading a small wagon train of supplies for the valley. With him rode Joseph, 3 months sober and standing straight in his saddle, the pride of his ancestors reclaimed. But there were others too, a Mexican woman with 2 young children clinging to her skirts, and behind them, a young white woman whose haunted eyes and careful movements told a story Clara recognized too well. Mrs. Morrison, Jebediah called out, though Clara had asked him repeatedly to use her maiden name. Brought the supplies you ordered, plus some folks who heard about your valley. The Mexican woman stepped forward hesitantly. Senora, we hear this is safe place. My husband, he die in mine accident. His brothers say I must marry him now, but he is cruel man. We have nowhere. You have here, Clara said firmly, moving to help with the children. This valley shelters those who need it. You're welcome as long as you choose to stay. The young white woman, she couldn't be more than 17, hadn't spoken, but the bruises fading on her wrists told enough. Clara caught her eye, offering a smile that said, I know, I understand. You're safe now. As they settled the new arrivals, Koa worked with Joseph to unload supplies, food, tools, books. Clara had ordered from as far as Denver, the beginning of her library, the seed of the school that would grow. More will come, Joseph said quietly to Koa in Apache. Word spreads like wildfire. The white woman who killed her brutal husband and uses his money to shelter the broken. She becomes legend already. Let them come, Koa replied. The valley has room, and Clara has plans that need many hands. Indeed. Clara's vision had expanded with each passing week. Not just a school, but a community. A place where different peoples could live and learn together. Where children could grow up seeing cooperation instead of conquest. That evening, they all gathered for a meal. Apache and Mexican, white and mixed. Sharing food and slowly building trust. The children, as children do, broke barriers fastest, playing together while their mothers watched with wary hope. Clara found herself teaching impromptu lessons, writing simple words in both English and Spanish, while Koa translated concepts into Apache. The young white woman, Mary, she'd finally whispered, watched with hungry eyes, and Clara made a mental note to assess her education. Another teacher would be needed soon. You create something new, the Mexican woman, Rosa, said wonderingly. Not Apache camp or Mexican village or American town. Something different. Something necessary. Clara replied. The world insists we must live apart, fear each other, fight for scraps while a few hoard plenty. But look, she gestured at the children playing. They don't know they're supposed to be enemies. We teach them that. What if we taught them something else instead? Later, as the others settled for the night, Clara and Koa walked to their favorite spot by the stream. The cottonwoods whispered secrets in the evening breeze, and somewhere an owl called, welcoming darkness. Your dream grows, Koa observed. Soon the valley won't contain it. Then we expand. Clara had been thinking about this. Samuel's ranch borders government land on two sides, land they stole from your people, sitting empty. What if we petition to buy it? Create a township founded on different principles. The government doesn't sell to Apache, or to women, but they sell to widows of prominent ranchers. And once it's mine, I decide who lives there. She turned to him, excited by possibilities. Think of it. Koa. Hundreds of acres where people like Rosa and Mary could homestead safely, where your people could live without reservation boundaries, where children of all bloods could learn together. You dream large dreams. I learned from the desert. It teaches that small dreams die in the heat. Only vast visions survive. He smiled at that, the expression transforming his serious face. Then we need lawyers who think like warriors, strategies that outflank prejudice, money applied like water to crack stone foundations. We, the word hung between them, waited with promise. Did you think I would watch from shadows while you reshape the world? He took her hands, his own calloused from work but gentle in their holding. Clara, these months, watching you heal, then grow, then lead, it moves something in me I thought died with my mother. Clara's heart thundered, but she made herself speak truth. I'm still married in law's eyes, even if Samuel lies in the ground. The scandal follows me, and I won't be any man's possession again, won't trade one cage for another, no matter how beautiful. I don't offer a cage. His amber eyes held depths of understanding. I offer partnership, equals building something together. Your vision and mine woven like the baskets my grandmother made, stronger together than apart. The world won't understand. Apache and white. They'll use it against the school, against everything we build. Let them try. His voice carried the quiet confidence she'd come to love. The desert doesn't care what the world understands. It creates its own truth. Cactus and dove, snake and rabbit, storm and silence, all exist together because that's what survival requires. Clara looked at their joined hands, his dark, hers pale, both marked by work and weather. I won't be a traditional wife. I have too much to build, too much to prove. Traditional wives are for traditional men. I am Apache who speaks Spanish and reads English, who honors 3 bloodlines and belongs fully to none. Traditional was never possible. He paused. But partnership, that we could create new, like everything else you envision. Before Clara could respond, young voices called from the camp, the children needing something, life intruding on private moments. But as they walked back together, she kept his hand in hers, decision crystallizing. Over the following days, the valley transformed further. Rosa proved skilled at cooking for groups, taking charge of communal meals. Mary, despite her youth and trauma, revealed a gift for organizing, creating systems for sharing work, managing supplies. Joseph began teaching the children basic tracking, his pride evident as they followed his lessons with eager attention. It's beginning, Clara told Jebediah one morning as he prepared for another supply run. Not just the school, but the community. What we talked about. It's more than that, the older man replied, watching Rosa's boys play warrior with sticks while Joseph showed them proper stance. It's hope. Been in short supply out here. People starving for it like they starve for water. That night, Clara found herself teaching by firelight, children and adults together learning letters that could unlock worlds. Koa sat among them now, no longer ashamed of his beginner's struggles, helping others who found the marks confusing. Tell us a story, Senora Clara. Rosa's youngest pleaded, about the letters, how they came to be. Clara thought, then began weaving truth and legend as her mother had done. Long ago, people could only share stories when they sat together, like we do now. But one day, a woman needed to send her wisdom to children far away. As she spoke, she caught Koa's eyes across the fire. He nodded slightly. Approval, understanding, something more. Tomorrow they would face new challenges. The territorial government would resist their land petition. Samuel's relatives might challenge the will. The world would insist their small experiment in cooperation must fail. But tonight, in this hidden valley that had become visible hope. Anything seemed possible. Clara had learned to shoot and build fire, to read tracks and find water. Koa was learning to write his name and read simple words. Mary was smiling for the first time since she'd arrived. Rosa's children slept without fear. The woman discovered that marks could hold meaning. Clara continued her story. That wisdom could travel without feet, that love could speak without voice. And so she taught others. Who taught others? Until no thought needed die with its thinker. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the star-filled sky like prayers made visible. In this moment, Clara understood what she'd really been building, not just a school or even a community, but a new kind of family. One bound not by blood or law, but by choice and shared purpose. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight, surrounded by people who'd found their way to sanctuary and chosen to help it grow. Clara felt the solid ground of certainty beneath her feet. She'd walked into the desert expecting death. Instead, she'd found life more abundant than she'd dared imagine. And at the center of it all, constant as the mountains that cradled their valley, was the man who'd offered her water when she thirsted, shelter when she fled, partnership when she stood ready to build. Together, they were writing a story the desert would remember, a tale of transformation that proved sometimes the greatest victories came not from conquest, but from cooperation. Not from taking, but from giving. Not from fear, but from the daily choice to trust in tomorrow's possibilities. The owl called again, and Clara smiled. Even the night singers approved. A year had passed since Clara Morrison stumbled into the valley more dead than alive. Now she stood on the same ridge where Koa had first spotted her. But everything had changed. Below stretched not just the hidden valley, but the beginnings of something unprecedented. A settlement where Apache, Mexican, and Anglo families lived as neighbors, where children learned in 3 languages, where the impossible had become everyday reality. The territorial governor arrives tomorrow, Jebediah said, joining her on the ridge. He'd become her right hand in legal matters, his weathered face now permanent fixture in their growing community. Bringing a federal marshal and 2 legislators, they want to see this experiment for themselves. Clara nodded, unsurprised. Their petition to purchase the surrounding government land had caused an uproar in the territorial capital. A woman, a scandalous widow who'd killed her husband, daring to create a mixed settlement. It challenged every assumption about how the West should be won. "Let them come," she said, echoing words Koa often used. "They'll see children reading together who they insist should be enemies. They'll see prosperity where they predicted failure. They'll see the future, whether they recognize it or not." Down in the valley, she could see that future taking shape. Mary, no longer the terrified girl who had arrived months ago, taught arithmetic to a mixed group of students under the cottonwoods. Joseph demonstrated traditional Apache farming methods, while Rosa's boys translated for the Spanish-speaking families. And Koa, her partner in every sense now, worked with the newest arrivals, helping them choose land for their homes. They'd married 2 months ago in a ceremony that blended traditions: Apache blessings, Mexican music, American legal documents. The scandal had been immediate and intense, but also irrelevant. Out here, results mattered more than propriety, and their results spoke louder than any gossip. "Mrs. Nayati," a young voice called. Clara turned to see Running Deer, one of the Apache children, racing up the path. "Teacher Mary says, 'Come quick, the walls are finished.'" Clara followed, smiling at how the children used her married name so naturally. In town, she was still the Morrison widow to those who dealt with her money. But here, she was Clara Nayati, teacher and builder, partner and protector. The school building rose from the earth like it had grown there, adobe walls mixed by Apache hands, timber frames cut by Mexican craftsmen, windows purchased with Morrison money and installed by Anglo settlers. Above the doorway, carved in 3 languages, were the words she'd chosen: "Knowledge is the path to freedom." "It's perfect," Mary breathed, running her hands along the smooth walls. The young woman had bloomed in the valley's safety. her teaching gift emerging as her fear receded. Our own real school? Our beginning, Clara corrected. Wait until you see the library Joseph and Koa are building. As if summoned by his name, Koa appeared, paint spattering his clothes. He'd been working on the interior murals, Apache symbols interwoven with Mexican patterns and American motifs, creating something entirely new. The governor will hate it, he said with satisfaction, slipping his arm around Clara's waist. Good. Hatred means we're doing something worth noticing. She leaned into his strength, still marveling at how natural this felt. Are the families ready? As ready as they'll be, though Miguel still wants to hide his Apache wife when the officials come. No hiding, Clara said firmly. We show them exactly what we are. If they want our taxes and our cooperation with territorial law, they'll accept our ways. That evening, the entire settlement gathered for what had become their tradition, a communal meal where each family contributed something, where stories were shared in multiple languages, where children played without regard for the boundaries their parents had been taught to maintain. Clara watched it all with a full heart. There were 43 people now, with more arriving each month. Word had spread along hidden networks, Apache camps, Mexican villages, isolated homesteads where women lived in fear. The valley had become a beacon for those seeking something different. You did this, Koa said quietly beside her. We did this, she corrected. I had a dream. You helped make it real. Everyone here added their own threads to the weaving. Old Joseph approached, still straight-backed despite his years, the respected elder now rather than the broken drunk he'd been. The ancestors speak, he said in Apache, then repeated in English for Clara. They say this place is what was always meant to be, different rivers joining to make strong water. As night fell and families retired to their homes, real houses now, not just shelters, Clara and Koa walked their favorite path by the stream. Tomorrow would bring challenges. The governor might try to shut them down, might declare their land purchases invalid, might bring the full force of territorial law against their small experiment in cooperation. But tonight, Clara felt the solid certainty that had grown in her like the desert plants Koa had taught her to recognize. Deep roots that could survive any drought, thorns that could defend against any threat, blooms that would emerge no matter how harsh the conditions. Do you ever regret it? Koa asked suddenly. You could have taken Morrison's money and lived quietly in some eastern city, been respectable again. Clara laughed, the sound carrying across the water. Respectable? I'm a woman who ran barefoot through the desert, who learned to shoot from an Apache warrior, who married outside her race and builds schools where children learn that difference is strength. She turned to face him. I've never been more myself. And if they come to tear it down, the government, the army, the ones who say this cannot be. Clara's hand moved to the derringer she still carried, though these days it was more symbol than necessity. Then I'll stand on that ridge with our rifle, and I'll remember what you taught me, that the desert protects its own. We've built something worth defending. Koa, and we're not alone anymore. Indeed, they weren't. As they returned to their own home, a simple adobe that had grown room by room as their partnership deepened, Clara could see lights in windows throughout the settlement. Each light represented a family that had chosen hope over fear, cooperation over isolation. The next morning came too soon, bringing dust clouds that announced the official party's arrival. Clara dressed carefully, not in the fashion of a proper territorial lady, but in the practical clothing that had become her signature. Split skirts for riding, a jacket that concealed her weapon, her hair braided in a style Rosa had taught her that kept it from her face while working. The governor was a thin man with calculating eyes who looked at their settlement like he was tallying votes. The federal marshal seemed more interested in assessing threats. The legislators whispered to each other in what they thought was subtle disapproval. Mrs. Morrison, the governor began, and Clara let it pass. This community of yours has caused quite a stir in the capital. Progress often does. Clara replied calmly, Would you like to see the school? The children are eager to demonstrate their lessons. What followed was a careful dance. The officials toured the settlement, their discomfort evident as they saw Apache and Mexican children reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, Anglo students counting in Spanish, mixed families working together in the fields. Mary led a geography lesson where students located their ancestral homelands on a map, explaining how far their families had traveled to find safety. "This is highly irregular," one legislator muttered when he saw Koa teaching Apache boys and Anglo girls to track together. "So was America," Clara replied. "A nation of different peoples choosing to build something new. We're simply continuing that tradition." The moment of truth came in the afternoon. The governor pulled Clara aside, his political smile never wavering. "You understand, Mrs. Morrison, that what you're doing here challenges certain established orders. There are those in the capital who want this shut down immediately. And you," Clara kept her voice neutral. "What do you want?" His calculating eyes swept over the settlement again, the productive fields, the new buildings, the obvious prosperity. "I want voters, Mrs. Morrison. I want tax revenue. I want territorial growth that attracts federal investment." He paused. "Can your experiment provide those things? Give us 5 years." Clara said, decision crystallizing. "Full legal recognition of our land purchases, protection under territorial law for all our residents regardless of origin, and the right to govern ourselves as an incorporated township. In return, we'll build something that makes New Mexico the envy of other territories, a place where different peoples work together instead of against each other, where prosperity comes from cooperation, where children grow up educated and capable. And if it fails, if this unity you preach falls apart," Clara met his gaze steadily, "then you can point to us as a cautionary tale and strengthen whatever policies you choose. But if we succeed, when we succeed, you can take credit for having the vision to support innovation." The governor studied her for a long moment, and Clara saw him recalculating, recognizing the steel beneath her composed exterior. This was no romantic dreamer, but a woman who'd survived the desert, faced down armed men, and built community from nothing. 3 years, he countered. "Provisional recognition. If you can show stability and growth, we'll discuss full incorporation." "Agreed." Clara extended her hand like a man would, and after only slight hesitation, the governor shook it. As the official party prepared to leave, the federal marshal approached Koa. "You're the one who killed Morrison." Koa met his gaze without flinching. "I defended this valley and those under my protection. Morrison chose to make that defense necessary." The marshal nodded slowly. "My wife's cousin married a brutal man. Took her 5 years to find the courage to leave. She wasn't as fortunate as Mrs. Nayati, is it now, to find somewhere safe to run." He touched his hat. "I'll report that I found no violations of federal law here." After they left, the settlement erupted in celebration. They'd won a reprieve, a chance to prove that their way could work. Children whooped and ran while adults embraced, tears and laughter mixing in the desert air. That night, Clara stood once more on the ridge, but now Koa was beside her. Their hands joined as they looked out over what they'd built. Lights glowed in windows below, and the sound of Joseph's drum carried on the wind as he taught the children, all the children, traditional songs. "I was so broken when I came here," Clara said softly. "So certain my life was over. The desert breaks us all." Koa replied, "The question is whether we let it remake us stronger or simply scatter our pieces to the wind. You remade me." "No." He turned her to face him, amber eyes serious in the moonlight. "You remade yourself. I just offered water when you thirsted. You chose to drink, to survive, to build. You chose to transform Clara Morrison, the victim, into Clara Nayati, the creator." Clara Nayati. She smiled at the name that bound her to him and to this place. "I like who she's becoming." "Becoming?" Koa gestured at the thriving settlement below. "Look what you've already become. Teacher, leader, visionary. The woman who looked at the desert and saw not emptiness but possibility. The woman who found a partner who saw the same possibilities." Clara corrected. "None of this exists without you." "Koa, your knowledge, your protection, your faith when mine faltered. They stood together in comfortable silence, the night wind carrying promises of rain that would make the desert bloom. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, supplies to manage, disputes to settle, the endless work of building something that had never existed before. But tonight was for gratitude, for wonder at how far they'd traveled from that desperate flight into the desert. "Do you remember what you told me that first night?" Clara asked. "That the desert had claimed me, would protect its own." "I remember. You were right. But I don't think either of us understood what that meant. That the desert would claim not just me, but everyone who needed sanctuary. That it would protect not just individual lives, but a whole new way of living." A coyote called in the distance, answered by another, then another, a whole pack singing to the stars. Once that sound had terrified Clara, now she heard it as the desert's own celebration, its acknowledgement of what grew in this hidden valley that was hidden no longer. "We'll face more challenges." Koa said practically, "Men like Morrison who believe in taking rather than building. Governments that prefer people separated and weak rather than united and strong. Those who profit from the current order won't yield easily. Then we'll face them as we've faced everything else," Clara said, fierce with certainty. "Together, with truth as our weapon and community as our shield, with the knowledge that what we build here will outlast those who oppose it because it's rooted in love rather than fear." She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd saved her life and helped her save her own soul. "I love you, Koanayati, not because you rescued me, but because you saw me clearly when I couldn't see myself, because you offered partnership when you could have claimed possession, because you dream as largely as the desert itself. And I love you, Clara Nayati," he replied, voice rough with emotion. "Because you took the pain meant to break you and transformed it into purpose. Because you see people as they could be, not just as they are. Because you build bridges where others build walls." They kissed under the vast desert sky. Two souls who'd found each other across impossible odds and chosen to create something beautiful from their broken pieces. Around them, their community slept peacefully, dreaming dreams made possible by one woman's desperate flight into the unknown and one man's decision to offer sanctuary. The desert approved, wind sighing through the canyons like a blessing. Here, where ancient spirits danced and new hopes bloomed, the impossible became everyday reality. Here, wounded hearts found healing and different peoples found common ground. Here, in this valley that had sheltered fugitives and birthed visionaries, the future took root with all the tenacity of desert plants, tough enough to survive any drought, beautiful enough to make the survival worthwhile. Clara Nayati, once Clara Morrison, once Clara Hensley, the frightened teacher, stood with her partner and surveyed their domain. She'd walked into the desert expecting to die. Instead, she'd learned to live, not just to survive, but to thrive, not just to escape, but to build, not just to hide, but to stand tall and declare, "This is who I am. This is what we've created. This is what's possible when fear gives way to hope." And in that moment, with Koa's arms around her and their community sleeping safely below, Clara knew with bone-deep certainty that the best was yet to come. The desert had taught her its greatest lesson, that even in the harshest conditions, life finds a way, love finds a way, hope finds a way. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight, under stars that had witnessed every human struggle and triumph, Clara Nayati stood ready to meet whatever came. She'd been broken and remade, tested and proven strong. Now she would build and teach and love, creating a legacy that would ripple out from this valley like water in the desert, rare, precious, and absolutely essential for life. The coyotes sang again, and Clara smiled. Even the wild ones knew. Something new had been born in this ancient place. Something worth singing about. Something worth protecting. Something that would endure long after its creators had returned to the dust from which they'd risen, transformed and transforming in turn. Thank you, dear friends, for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Clara and Koa's journey touched your hearts as much as it touched mine. Where are you listening from today? Please leave a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just like our characters connected across their differences. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about this tale of courage, love, and the power of choosing hope over fear. Until our next adventure in the Old West, keep riding toward your dreams.